for people who want to talk about Taoism and brain science, people who want to advance holistic cognitions and studies about the balance of the brain, to really have something accurate and valid, so that people aren't just treating Taoism as, you know, a cultural belief, you know, or, you know, that's your faith, to really accept it's methodical and practical in the same way that acupuncture has been accepted, you know. So I stopped there on that model, but I wanted to talk about peace studies, seen as, you know, we're here to talk about the I'll get the acronym right, International Institute of Peace Studies and Global Philosophy. So how is this relevant to peace? So I skip straight to my last slide and I talk about science and religion. Now, for a long time, we have looked at religion as a characteristic of the right brain, and the qualities which are associated with science, such as logic and ration, isolation, as associated with left brain qualities and perspectives. So we can talk about the brain in this separated way. And a stereotype is that people who are thinking in the right-brained way are religious and believe in mysticism and may engage in certain practices, and people who are left-brained, you know, may be very analytical and scientific minded. Now, I have to build on the form of research that is out there. Now, I don't separate the two brains, the two hemispheres of the brain in this way. I talk about the relationship between the two hemispheres and talk about how the brain should be balanced. But what I do here is explain what brain balance can achieve. We talk about it in terms of health and this kind of thing, but what I do here is something slightly different. Most people are aware of the ancient methodologies. We spoke about it earlier when I think God was still the head of science back in the days of Newton. You know, it's only modern times, and not just say the West, because it's everywhere now because of globalization. Modern times, we like to have this separation of religion over there and science over there, as if these are two different things. When in the ancient world, these were often one thing. And now I will say, yes, of course, this one thing was not science, as some people like to label it, but it was not religion either, as people like to label it. It was something different. It was a balanced methodology. And it wasn't science, because science is reductionist by nature. We study a thing in isolation, only a thing. So we can study only the brain or only certain cells of the brain, parts of the brain in isolation. Of course, people did not do this in the ancient world. In the ancient East, up until I think it's 17 or 1800s, it was pretty much illegal to chop open brains in the way that neuroscience does. And, you know, I talk about neuroscience as a imbalanced methodology, which is focusing on certain aspects of the world, focusing on the world in isolation instead of the world from a holistic perspective, which talks about the brain in conjunction with the body and the body in conjunction with the planet and the cosmos, you know, the entirety of existence. And that's what ancient methodologies were drawing upon. These were not science at all, and we cannot call them religion in the same regard. They definitely had the religious aspects, but they had wisdom and practices that we try to draw upon, but are often absent from modern religions. So it's a real utilization of the whole brain. These ancient people are characterized in Egypt and China as being much more balanced in the brain. So the idea works that if we apply the Taoist rules, we can look how brain balance can affect society, which is something people are talking about less. People are focusing about health, longevity, anxiety reductions. But I want to talk about Taoism in a different way. Now, another author and teacher I studied under briefly again whilst I was in China was Chen Shantian. And so again, along with Robin Wang, who I took the 6 rules from, I drew up on some of his philosophy. So yeah, the things I picked up on my first trip to China for Confucian Institute Summer School. So Tian talks about, let me pronounce this correctly in English, a correlative cosmological approach. And it's about the multiple layers of existence which yin-yang exist upon. So you don't just have yin-yang in the brain, of course, and between the mind and the body, you have it in a balance of yin-yang in society in conjunction with the mind and body as well, and in society in conjunction with the planet, because you know the small things we do on a social level can affect the planet at large, and we can even affect the environment through our actions the same way science has been doing. So the idea works that if instead of operating in a left hemispheric way in terms of science, which has had effects on the planet, you know, it's you operate in this way, you think in this way, you create methods in this way, then you interact with the planet in this way. And we don't just have an imbalance in the brain and body, we have an imbalance in society. And we can see that often with patriarchy, for instance. They had much greater balance in society in the ancient world, something that we've lost partially, not completely. And so we're impacting society, and of course society is impacting the environment globally. But if we balance our brains and we think in balanced terms, we will create balanced philosophies. Now, there's a cause and effect argument. Is it a balanced brain creating a balanced philosophy, or is it a balanced philosophy, you know, such as Qigong, and the practice of it creating a balanced brain? Well, it's both, isn't it? It's chicken and egg. We balance the brain, we balance philosophies, we balance society. You know, if you go into a balanced society, this will help balance your brain. So there's an interaction on multiple levels of existence. And this is something that people haven't been talking about in terms of yin-yang brain science. They've been speaking about it in terms of philosophy only, but we were unable to talk about this scientifically due to the lack of a model. But with the new model, we can accept the yin-yang, well, the balance of the brain is identical to a yin-yang balance, and that is what we create in society, a balance of yin-yang within society. And in this case, it's a balance of science and religion. An imbalance of science and religion causes science over there and religion over there, and now they can clash between them. But a balance of science and religion in the mind, in terms of the way we think, causes a balance in society. So, for instance, if everybody was practicing Taoist methods of acupuncture, for instance, this would be your medical system, and this would also be your religious system. And so in this regard, science and religion can't clash because they are one in the same. It wasn't till much later in China when this balance began to reduce, or certain practices began to reduce, which science and religion could clash. We've had the science and religion clash here for centuries longer. But it's the idea that the balance of the brain is really important for society for these reasons. So, you know, to understand that a balanced brain isn't just about health, it's about our impact on the world, societally and globally. we can measure the negative effects of an imbalance of science on the planet. Unfortunately, we can't measure the impact of religion on the planet. If we could, I think we could see the positive aspects of meditation on the planet globally. Of course, we cannot measure that, but I feel it is there. Interconnections between people, interconnections between different groups. So that's enough about the model and how we can induce more peaceful society due to a more balanced society. How long is left on the clock? I'm at 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 15 minutes?
I think we've done the 20 minutes now. Yeah.
Yes.
Let's move on to questions and save it for next week. Is that okay?
Absolutely, yes.
Because I know there's more to come, but let's
I always prepare too much.
Yeah. No, it's good. It's better to have too much.
I hope that was all clear. It's very hard to explain the multiple levels.
Very interesting. Okay, so let's have some questions. Armel, do you want to go first? Could you follow the English okay?
Not 100%, but maybe 80%.
Okay, enough.
And
follow the...
Thank you for this, because it's really interesting, this approach. And it seems very difficult to do some traditional and point of view of yin-yang and scientific, which is, as you said, analysis, and so it's a kind of challenge. I was wondering if you, maybe one step could be mathematics for the model of yin-yang and for the image of the world. I could imagine maybe mathematical correspondence between the 6 points you made from yin-yang. It's a kind of a structure which could be explained with mathematics, maybe. I don't know if you...
Some people believe everything can be represented in numbers. Now, the 6 rules I created are intended to apply to the whole universe. Of course, being invented sometime just prior to the Han Dynasty or completed, they was never applied to brain science. Now, I explain these rules in terms of neurological activity. So the interactions between, for instance, rule 4 is interaction. I explain that a stimulus in the left hemisphere triggers a response in the right hemisphere. A trigger in the right hemisphere causes a response in the left hemisphere. There's multiple examples. I can go into that on, but I do not know of any mathematical relevance to those rules. I will think about it, but I do know of mathematical principles which can be applied to yin-yang in terms of what I described as the correlative cosmological approach. Now, I came across this in the West without yin-yang, and it was to measure, I think we spoke about briefly, are you aware of the Fibonacci sequence? The golden ratio. So talking about the golden ratio of multiple levels of existence. And very recently, they have found, or alleged, I haven't checked the source or the details to verify the validity, but they're claiming that the spiral within DNA inside the human corresponds to the Fibonacci sequence, the golden ratio. And of course, the Fibonacci sequence, golden ratio, is found in the body in multiple ways, and it's found in the brain as well. Our preference for, our aesthetic preference for images, including faces, which contain the golden ratio. And of course, we found the golden ratio in so many ways on the planet. And then again, even out there in the cosmos. For instance, the spirals of galaxies in the distance, people are stating that the golden ratio, or golden mean, I think some people call it, but you know, the Fibonacci sequence is contained within these spirals. So that is the mathematics I have found relevant. Now, if I now refer to the Taoism, because it can be done without Taoism, in the same way that many different religions, faiths, perspectives come to the same conclusion, because they are all pointing at a valid thing that we cannot depict and we cannot describe, we can't quite grasp or touch, but through multiple different ways we try to. So I've seen this done without yin yang. I'm interested in doing a similar thing with yin yang. On my undergraduate dissertation, so it's quite many years ago now, I was talking about the correspondence of DNA, the human, the planet, on different levels of existence. So I was talking about how genetic modification changes the body and it has an impact on the planet at large. And the way it works is I took the example of Russian dolls. If you know the Russian dolls, you get a little doll, medium-sized doll, big doll. And these dolls actually trace back to the Song dynasty, China. And they speak on multiple levels. They speak about the interconnections between each level of existence, you know, the correlative cosmological approach, the idea that the same thing, rules, are contained on each level. So the way that yin-yang exists on every level of existence.
So they're actually Chinese dolls, really. We shouldn't talk about Russian dolls. The Russians got them on the trade routes from China. That's what you're saying. Right?
It's quite probable.
That's really interesting.
I think all the way from England, all we know is they're from very far in the eastern direction. I've read sources which say Song dynasty China. I know that.
What are the dates of the Song dynasty?
Oh, I think we're about 12, roughly. I do not know the exact dates offhand. You know me in time chronology, but I'm talking around about the Song. They trace back to, but there may be other records placing them earlier, but I've traced them as far back as that. I'll try and find the sources for this over the next few days and weeks.
I'd love to see somebody do a PhD on the origin of the Russian dolls. That would be fascinating. Because also Ken Wilber, just to follow on what you're saying, talks about this multiple planes of existence.
Call it planes.
And how things reflect the same sort of the same mathematics, but at different levels.
Exactly.
And he calls it the nestedness of reality. So things nest inside each other, and the Russian dolls or Chinese dolls is a perfect simile for that.
And so it can be done with or without the dolls. You know, there's many different ways of approaching it. So I use the dolls as one to represent DNA, one to represent the whole organism, one to represent the planet, and showing that if we change or manipulate the DNA on the first doll, it will change the whole organism, and we have an impact on the planet. And I begin to speculate on the effects of the cosmos at large. How much are we affecting? And this is the reason, because we talk about DNA as random mutations. It's a popular word out there, but as far back as the 70s, we found out that these mutations are not random at all. They found out that these mutations are actually geared towards survival. They found this within wheat. They found that the wheat plant was actually changing its gene. And we can't talk about it at will, but it was actually changing its gene so that you end up with more beneficial mutations than maladaptive mutations. So it's the idea that somehow we don't really understand, but the genes, the mutations which are occurring they seem to be of intention or mind or of something. And that's the thing about the Tao. We don't actually state what it is. But it seems that when we touch something, that we shouldn't mess with, according to a lot of people, we impact another level. And so the last doll I call the all-pervading Tao. And it seems that that is what is having a knockback effect and causing other mutations to occur to compensate the planet, to rebalance the imbalance we have caused through our adaptations. And of course we can find the mathematics on many different levels. So these are the kind of things I can do. It's called building geocentric models. Yes.
I've got my question.
Yeah.
Sticking with the mathematics theme, you were looking at my book on religious mathematics.
Yes, I was.
I think you were going to say something about it. What did
Yes,
you
it's
find
here.
in there that
So
sheds light on this?
This
How-
book here.
Yeah. How was that useful for this, your thesis? Because you'd not come across this before.
No, I hadn't seen this publication before. So, I'm not sure which thesis I was writing in. Let me check from this book. So, I'm going to read a paraphrased quote, and it is the intention. It's a commonality between, you state that a commonality between all religions is the intention of restoring the cosmic and sacred unity of humanity. And the key to this is consciousness, recognition of the existence of oneness. Yes, so now which paper was I writing about this in? I cannot remember because it cannot possibly be for my MA, so it must be for a future paper or for this topic only. But yeah, so if I repeat that briefly, a commonality between all the religions is that they must consciously recognize oneness. And it is through this recognition, I think you term it awakening, understanding that everything is one in certain regards. And I begin to explore this through neuroscience. And I'm going to get back to criticizing neuroscience because I used to be a neuroscientist in my early study days at university before I changed into religions. So now I'm in the intersection of both, trying to prove things, and more importantly than prove is to grant a greater comprehension. And so again, we look at the research on the right hemisphere, and what many authors in psychology are pointing to is that whereas the left half of the brain, the science brains are termed it, and I'm sorry for getting into left brain, right brain stuff, because it's not quite true. Talk about separation in this way. The left half of the brain likes to study everything in isolation, so we don't like to talk about the oneness of you, the planet, the cosmos. We like to chop it down into little pieces, and quite literally in neuroscience, to every little cell, and talk about how everything is separate, which is also an important perspective. I don't wish to completely insult science. It's been a very important advancement for the planet, the scientific knowledge we have. But there are, of course, the downsides to dissections, the way we are relating to organisms, to view things in this way, to view animals in this way, is something we can dissect. It is terrible, and that's the perspective of the left hemisphere and reductionism, that things can be broken down into this way. They see things in this way. But the right hemisphere, which apparently we don't use enough in the modern world, sees things as all interconnected. It has a different perspective, and I talk about in my MA thesis, actually, I do mention this, about balancing the two to have a correct perspective, because there are the many things, the things that we can classify as many, and there is the oneness. And I learned about this briefly in China again, and I cannot guarantee I get the pronunciation correct here, but it's Yi Do Bu Fen, so it's the indivisible one and many. It's that many things are not separate. And I was talking a lot about the balance between the two, and I think there was another author there, and he was much more focusing on the oneness. You know, it was a guy called Bien, and he was focusing on everything is one, and there is a lot of tendency in some of the Chinese philosophy to look only, or to have more of a focus on everything being unified, which is important. You know, to understand that nature is for some is more important than talking about everything as separate. So, yeah.
What did you make of the chapter on unity, the oneness? Did you have a look at it?
Was this
yet?
chapter 7?
The one on the number 1? It was a whole.
This is where I took this quote from. I do have another quote. I've taken 2 quotes. So that was definitely from chapter 7.
Okay, looking at unity,
yeah.
what it is and the concept and all that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just ask a silly question, because I'm a novice when it comes to Chinese?
Yeah.
You've been learning Mandarin and
Yes.
take my hat off. When the Chinese write numbers, if I'm in a maths class teaching the Chinese class mathematics, how do they write the numbers? Do they use Arabic numbers or do they have their own numbering system?
I've never been in a maths class in China. I've been into a bank in China.
Okay.
And I think it's either or. They do have their own system.
Yeah.
But both are fine. I think.
So they also use the Arabic numeral system, or the Hindu it was originally, the Indian numbers.
Yes, of
like
course.
we
You know,
use in
I've
the
never been in a
West.
maths class, but you imagine a mobile phone from China. It will most likely, as far as I'm aware, just have the ordinary numbers. You know,
Yeah.
if you buy a.
But there is.
computer from China.
I'm just asking about the history of the Chinese numbering system itself. You've not gone into that.
Not at all. It is there,
Yeah,
but.
yeah. I've got some books on the history of mathematics. I'll look it up.
The symbol for what I mean, there's not much difference. The symbol for 1 over here is this.
Yeah.
The symbol for 1 over there is that.
Oh, okay.
The Roman numeral, for instance, the Roman numbers is that for 2, and the Chinese one is that, pretty much like an
Okay,
equal
so
sign.
they've sort of put them.
And then it
sideways.
goes, and then 3 is like that, similar to a Roman numeral on its side.
Okay.
Then the similarity breaks down from there.
Okay.
But so yeah,
I'll look at,
but
yeah, fascinating.
what I finish by end by stating is that the importance of the right hemisphere in terms of oneness, and I talked about the ancient societies, they had a greater sense of oneness, egalitarian societies, if I've got the term correct there. Of course, we're utilising the right hemisphere more. We talk about Chinese societies, other East Asian societies, and as well as other non-Western societies are also using the right hemisphere more, and of course they have more collectivist societies. So this is where the practicality in reality comes in again on the multiple levels of existence. If you have more of a balanced brain that uses this side of the brain to view things as one, you can view society as one. You know,
Would this be the attraction to communism? Do you think communism is a sort of mathematical oneness, that's why China adopted it?
I'm certain that the two are related. What I can mention
Because
that
Marx was a great mathematician. He tried to explain what we call Marxism mathematically. You know.
I can
I
imagine.
wonder if did you meet any Chinese Marxists who are into the mathematics of communism at all?
Not the mathematics side.
Because there's very few people in the West that really understand all that. It'd be really fun to talk to some Chinese philosophers that have gone into it. I do know of one Chinese philosopher, a famous guy, who I'll dig out his name for next week, who had a similar idea to you, that there's an all-pervadingness at every level of being, and that we humans are individuals, but we're group members of a family, which is like the next level up. Then we're members of a village or a community. Then we're members of a region. Then members of a nation. Then members of a continent. Then a planet. And then the cosmos. And this is an official Chinese philosopher, quite famous, I can't remember his name.
Well,
He's sort of echoing what you're saying.
it sounds like the kind of thing I've came across in Confucianism. I think that it's less believed today by some, but I did come across some research that did support this idea. Yeah, I think it's still there.
The way of heaven is all pervading.
Yeah,
Therefore, the sage pays attention to the Lord.
I think these things are still there, definitely.
Good. Well, say give my love to the Chinese
But
philosophers.
just to end, to talk
Yeah.
about that, yeah. So if we have the balance of brain and more right hemispheric activity, we utilise that side of ourselves more. We will impact society, you know, through the psychological impact on society. And I think the last thing I'll mention is Israel. You must have came across it. I know you study a lot of the Near East. Is where they raise their children in, is it kibbutzim? Is it, if I pronounce that anywhere near correctly? And that's because they're not viewing everybody as separate. They are one in that regard. So there's so many ways in which our studies of neuroscience can help us understand this, and the way that we can bring philosophies in to represent this collectively, you know, to get all the data and hold it in one system instead of reductionist. And I'll end by saying a lot of my future research is going into Jungian studies, and this is because the things I do and represent and talk about in neuroscience can also be represented with Jungian philosophy. And this is a great thing. So we can have the psychology mixing with yin yang, representing the brain, society, the globe, building models with it, but without having to go through a lot of the reductionist sciences. So it's much more akin to some of the philosophers I'm working with.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you very much, Kane. Thanks for your sharing, and we'll go into Jung maybe next week. Yeah. Thanks.
Hopefully soon.